Hi there, you're listening to the Estranged Heart podcast, and I'm your host, Kreed Revere. Welcome back to our returning listeners, and if this is your first time here, thank you for selecting this podcast to listen to. As we begin today's episode, I invite you to grab a cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and listen with an open heart. But first, the regular disclaimer. I am not a licensed therapist or counselor. Nothing within this podcast should be considered or taken as therapy. If you are in need of therapeutic support such as counseling, please seek out a therapist near you. Hi there. Thanks for tuning in today. Before we jump into today's episode, a couple of announcements and quotes to share. Announcements. I have a rather large announcement to make, and that is that AC Bergenfischer, formerly estranged adult child, now reconciled with his mom. He's been guest co-hosting with me over the last few months, and beginning in September, AC has graciously agreed to join me on a permanent basis as the co-host for The Estranged Heart. I am super excited about having him on board on a permanent basis, regular basis, and joining me in this endeavor. Both of us are passionate about helping folks to heal their relationships. And I think that this community, the listeners of this podcast, have welcomed AC with open arms and get a lot out of what he brings to the table as well. Just as I bring things to the table for estranged parents, AC brings that for the estranged adult children. Even though I'm also a formerly estranged adult child, I think there can be some resistance to me from the adult children, and I totally understand that. So that's why I wanted to, in part, not the entire reason, but in part, wanted to bring AC on board in a more permanent and regular position. That being said, one of the goals that I've always had with this podcast has been to help to bridge the distance between parents and adult children when it comes to estrangement. My end goal has always been to help families to reconcile if at all possible. I understand that not every estrangement is going to end up in reconciliation. However, that's really what I strive for here. And I think that it's important to hear both sides. I think I talk often about this being two sides of the same coin and helping to bridge, again, the misunderstandings, the volatile emotions that are at play oftentimes with estrangement, and helping to reduce that and bring in healing and healthier relationships. In the end, that's really the goal of this podcast and the work that I do. And I believe AC is on board with that as well. In addition to bringing AC on board as a permanent co-host of The Estranged Heart, he and I will be offering joint coaching sessions. I think that it's oftentimes can be helpful to hear different perspectives. And I think that both AC and I can help, be it parents or adult children, to try to navigate some of the complexities that are involved with estrangement and or reconciliation. So I'm super excited about that. AC is super excited as well. And we look forward to being able to assist those who would like our support in that. So if you're interested in that, information is in the show notes on how to schedule a joint session with both AC and I. So again, Welcome to AC, to the Estranged Heart podcast, as a co host. And I know that my listeners will welcome him with open arms as well. Another reminder is that the Moving Beyond Family Struggles Summit will be happening October 12th through the 15th. If you would like to attend that summit, the registration link is in the show notes. It's also on my Instagram account and the link in my bio there. And I am making periodic postings on the Estranged Heart Facebook page as well. There will be myself and 29 other estrangement experts speaking at this summit. And so if you're interested, again, please feel free to look at the show notes and register via the link provided there. Again, dates are October 12th through the 15th of 2023. And that will be online and recorded. So it's something that you can also purchase for having for future reference as well. And I have two quotes for today. The first one is, your perspective is always limited by how much you know. Expand your knowledge and you will transform your mind. And that is by Bruce Lipton. And the second is, your power never lives in telling people what to do. If you stand on a soapbox, you will always be standing alone. Your power lives in humility, compassion, and vulnerability. True power is one's ability to connect authentically. What usually gets in the way is ego, which is fueled by fear. And that is by The Angry Therapist. So on to today's episode. In today's episode, I wanted to answer some questions that I have received from listeners. And I mean, oh my goodness, I could spend weeks just recording episodes for answering questions that I get from listeners. And so I appreciate your patience. Please be patient with me if you have sent questions in and would like to have those answered. I'm working on them. Um, and if you have thought of questions and you've never submitted them, please do so. It's something that, if you're thinking it, I can guarantee you there are at least 10 others, if not hundreds of others, that are thinking the exact same thing and wondering the exact same question. So feel free to email me. My email address is in the show notes. I'll say it here, but it's also in the show notes as well. That email address is theestrangedheart@gmail.com. So if you have questions for either myself and or AC, we're happy to answer them. Email them to us and we'll get to them just as soon as possible. Also understanding that, these questions, while they may seem like simple questions, I've yet to receive one that can be just a simple, sure, just do A, B, C, and D, and that as an answer. As with estrangement, estrangement is complex, it's layered, it's complicated, and therefore by default means that questions that are asked cannot, there is generally no short sweet response that can be given or an answer given. So I'm trying to muddle my way through this. AC will be joining me as we move throughout the next and coming months to answer these, but we do enjoy hearing from those who listen to the podcast. It's nice to know, number one, there are folks out there listening, but number two, that this is sparking curiosity. It's sparking questions. People have inquiries and would like to know our suggestions on next steps. And that, again, if you're thinking it, others are thinking the exact same thing, but haven't, for whatever reason, emailed in or asked those questions on social media. So if you have those questions, drop them. Feel free to drop them on social media or email them in if it's more of a private thing, but happy to answer as many as possible. So that is today's topic. I have 4 or so questions that have been asked that I would like to spend some time answering, and yeah, we'll take it from there. So the first question is a mom who has the name of her estranged daughter's therapist and has been wanting to send a letter. The mom has been wanting to send a letter to the therapist so that the therapist has, quote, both sides of the story, end quote. Um, this is not, again, this is not a first time I've ever heard this question. I hear this often. There is a some seemingly urgent need for parents to make sure other people know their sides of the story as well. So whether it's to the general community, family, friends, etc., or to a therapist or another mental health professional, etc., and wanting to give your side of the story as the estranged parent. And I understand, as a formerly estranged mom, I understand wanting everybody to know my side of the story too, right? However, I have found that oftentimes doesn't go as well as we think it will go. It's oftentimes not readily accepted by people as we think it would be or should be. And so I caution against doing this in the context of family and friends, etc., with without first getting clear on why you're asking the question. Why can't I tell my side of the story? Or getting to the need, what is the need that I feel in needing this therapist to know my side of the story? Again, everything I talk about on this podcast is through the lens of curiosity, trying to understand the other person's perspective. And so with this question, I have a couple of questions, right? Is what is your goal here? What is the beneath the surface goal? Okay, so the surface goal is I want them to hear my side, right? But there's a reason you're wanting them to hear your side. So is it to prove that their client, your estranged child, is wrong? Are you trying to prove your estranged adult child is quote unquote crazy? Are you what is the goal, right? Are you trying to be helpful? And if in your adult child's therapy process, and if that is your answer, I would also question, why do you think you, as a parent of an adult child, need to impose your input, your story on their mental health therapy and that process? Why are you not trusting the therapist, and why do you not trust your adult child? Now, I get it. As a formerly estranged mom, in the beginning of my estrangement, I didn't trust my estranged adult children, right? I thought I knew better. That was before I got into therapy and really discussing in therapy about my estrangement and learning more about it, why it happened, how we got there, and digging into my own history. Right? So that's where I'm going with this. So investigate, what are your goals, right? My next question would be, what need are you trying to fill by reaching out to the therapist? Because I'm here to tell you there's a subconscious need that you have that hasn't been met, and you're hoping to get it met by this course of action, by reaching out to the therapist and sharing your side of the story. oftentimes that's because we haven't been seen, heard, or validated. Our side of the story hasn't been seen, heard, or validated. And so we're desperate to have someone do that for us, just as I believe that probably on some subconscious level, you're understanding that your adult child is actually getting that from their therapist, right? Now I know a lot of estranged parents do not agree with therapy and do not think that therapists are doing justice for the estrangement world. I happen to disagree with that. Anyone who's listened to this podcast for any length of time, you understand that I disagree with that. While are there therapists who are maybe not educated about estrangement? Yes. Are there therapists who are less than helpful with this? Yes. However, by and large, therapists want their client to be healthy and happy. And for most human beings, the preference is to be happy and healthy within relationship with their family members. However, that's not always possible. Okay. So those would be some of my questions. If you're wanting to reach out and share your side of the story with someone, there's an unmet need that you have. And quite frankly, your adult child's therapist is not the person who needs to see, hear, and validate you. Your therapist needs to see, hear, or validate you. Your coach needs to see, hear, or validate you, right? Not your child's therapist. Okay. In addition to the fact that by sending an unsolicited communication to your adult child's therapist is a violation of a boundary that is, I just cannot express how damaging that can be to your estranged adult child. If you reach out and send a letter to their therapist, and I'm here to tell you again, as a therapy client myself, we tend to be a little possessive of our therapist. We call them my therapist, right? And anyone sending in unsolicited advice or unsolicited communication to my therapist is not someone I'm going to see generally in the beginning as a friend. I'm going to see them as a foe, and I'm not going to be happy about it. So if it's invited, then that's a completely different story, right? If your estranged adult child says, if you ask your kid, can I write your therapist a letter? And they say yes, then by all means have at it. If the therapist reaches out to you on behalf of the estranged adult child and wants to hear from you, then by all means share what you need to share. But if they haven't reached out to you, if they haven't given you permission or asked for and solicited in any way any information from you, please don't do it. Please, please don't do it. It could place you in a much more difficult position with your adult child than would be helpful. Now, there's always exceptions to every rule, but by and large, this is what I hear from adult children. I know when I was estranged from my mom, if I had been in therapy at that point in time and my mother reached out and shared her side of the story, I would have been livid. Find your own source to share your story with, your side of the story with. Okay? Find someone who can help support you. You deserve that. Just like your child deserves to have someone to support them and they have found a therapist to do that, so do you. Reach out and find your own support. And the same thing applies to them. If the estranged adult child were to reach out to your therapist wanting to share their side of the story, I would be having this exact same conversation with them. Okay? And, as a side note too, therapists generally, I mean, they're not going to, if you send a note to them, they're not going to respond to you. Yes, they may share that information with the adult child, and that's probably where the adult child's going to get really, really mad when the therapist comes in and says, "Hey, just want to let you know your mom called or your dad wrote a letter or an email to me, and, do you want me to read it to you?" Because they're not going to hide that from their client. If there's one thing about therapy, it is about being transparent and open and honest. So keep that in mind as well. All right. On to the next question. The next question was, how do you advise a mother who has survived long-term estrangement? What coping skills do you recommend? Is it better to keep and nurture some degree of hope? I am not a fan now, nor have I been in the past, and I am doubtful that I will be in the future, of giving up hope. Now, am I talking about giving up all hope? Yes. I am not a fan of that. I have seen too many estrangement situations where there has been long-term silence on the part of the adult child. 8 years, 9 years, 12 years, 20 years, where the kid shows back up out of the blue, sends a text message, knocks on the front door, etc. No, I don't agree in giving up hope. However, the caveat to that is that I don't believe in hanging on to so much hope that you cannot get on with the business of living your life. Okay? I like to think of it as a small little flicker of flame, right? It's just really small, but it's still there. It hasn't been snuffed out. And it just remains just this constant little flicker of a flame of hope that one day your child will return. I do believe in parents getting on with the business of living their life. When our children do return, we want them to return to happy, healthy, functioning parents. We don't want them to come back and find a shriveled up parent who is deeply depressed and unable to function on a day-to-day basis. That would probably lead the adult child to estrange again, depending on the circumstances that led them to estrangement in the first place. But sometimes leading to estrangement is, this parentification where they feel like they have to take care of the parent, either the emotional and mental needs of the parent or the physical needs, etc. So if they come back to a parent where they are going to have to, or feel obligated to, or feel some sort of, I don't know, obligation to take care of and stick around because this parent is, for all intents and purposes, has ceased to exist. What coping skills? Number one, first and foremost, again, get yourself into therapy. If you're not in therapy, get yourself a coach. Start dealing with your stuff. Not necessarily to get into therapy for the estrangement, but to deal with the grief of the estrangement and why it is affecting you the way that it is affecting you and how to get out of that, right? I believe in a time period, when I was estranged. At first, I had to, for my sanity, take down all the pictures of my kids and grandchildren. I could not face them every day. I just couldn't. I could not do that and get on with the business of living life. Eventually, I was able to put those photographs back up. But if that's where you find yourself, then do what you need to do for your own self-care, right? Find your tribe. Find your support system of people who can help you through the harder days, because you will have them regardless of how long the estrangement goes on, but who will also help support you and be your cheerleader on the days that you're up and you're feeling good, and they're not giving you this indication that, oh my gosh, you're estranged, how dare you be happy, how dare you have joy, your children aren't in your life, what are you doing, why aren't you holed up in the house and sunken down on the sofa. Like, find your people who can help hold that space for you, and those people who are willing to talk about your child when you are wanting to talk about your child, right? One of the biggest things I hear, and I know that it hurt me tremendously, was when people either acted as if I didn't have children, and I understand that it was their own discomfort and their own fears about dealing with their own stuff around that. However, in the moment, it didn't help me, right? I felt like they were pretending my kids were dead, and I very much had very alive children, and I was not willing to go to that place of pretending that they were dead and they didn't exist, right? So find your people who are willing to talk about your children, but also being respectful of the times that maybe you don't want to talk about them. Now, again, for me, that person was my therapist. I didn't have general friends who could do those things for me, because they had their own triggers, their own stuff that prevented them from being able to be present for me in that way. So find your own people. Find your own hobbies and interests, right? That's another way of getting on with the business of life. If you've always wanted to paint, go take a painting class. If you've always wanted to do, cross country skiing, then go take a class, figure it out, go do it. If you've wanted to go hike on some specific trail, go do it. Find things that make you happy outside of your role as a mother. You were a person and a human being with a life, with interest, etc., before you became a mother. Tap back into that. Okay. I would also ask too, are you hesitant to move on because you feel, again, this kind of social construct that, well, if my kids aren't in my life, I should be unhappy and I should be sad all the time. And so there's just a little bit of this guilt that, how dare I be happy? So I'd check in with that. That's a curious question to check in on. So check in with those feelings. Why am I struggling with getting on with the business of living life? What is that about? Why do I feel that I need to wait for my kid to return before I can be happy? Okay? Those are some questions I'd be asking my therapist or coach to help you work through that. But again, I'm not now, nor will I ever be a fan of giving up complete and total hope. I'm just not. I've seen too many cases where the kids do return. Um, and if you're doing the work on yourself, when they come back, they come back to a completely healthy, happy mom who welcomes them with open arms and doesn't stand at the door with her arms crossed and says, "What the hell is your problem? Where the hell have you been for the last 20 years?" Instead, she opens her arms and says, "I'm so glad to see you. Come on inside." right? The next question is, what is the next suggested step to take after writing an amends letter after year 1 of estrangement? So I'm not sure if this question is, there was an amends letter and then a year of estrangement after the amends letter was sent, or there was a year of estrangement and then the amends letter was sent. So I'll try to answer both. My questions that I have are, what has been the communication, if any? Has this been a total estrangement? Because estrangements, there's a wide varied scale of estrangement. There can be everything from minimal contact to just text messages and no phone calls, no visits, no things like that, to full on no contact at all. So my suggestion is, if you've not received communication from your adult child that says, please do not contact me in any way, shape, or form, if you've not received that, then a follow up to the amends letter, a short follow up, would probably be okay to send, right? Alternately, if your child has not communicated with you for a year, that's a pretty big indication they don't want communication from you. Okay. I don't know that I would follow up with a follow up letter unless I had more. I do this often, helping folks write amends letters and going through the amends letters and learning the history, learning more about the adult child and the relationship with the parent before I advise on what to write in an amends letter, and then what type of follow up contact to have, if any. So again, I don't have context here, and that is something that I would want to have, really, to be able to give good solid advice. A lot of it is just, it's case dependent. That being said, if they've said don't contact me, if it's been a year of estrangement, complete full on estrangement, that's generally good indication they don't want communication from you. So that, at that point in time, is when I would send the letter, or have sent the letter, and I would just let it be, right? And allow them the time and space that they're asking for in an unsaid way, if they've had no contact with you, right? Sometimes the best way that we can love our children is to honor their wishes. All right. If there's been some form of contact, but minimal, a brief follow up letter. Hi, just wanted to check in with you. If it's been a year of no contact or a year of estrangement, and then you send the amends letter, in 6 to 8 weeks or so, I'd probably send a follow up, right? Check in. Wanted to check in to see if you received the letter from me, and if you had any questions, if you're open to talking, I'm here. Something that brief, not, not going into anything else. Okay. So I don't know, that one's a little tough to answer without, again, context and understanding behind it. So um, I always try to err on the side of respecting an adult child's unspoken wishes, right? Um, so again, without context and a history, it would be a little difficult for me to give a full on advisement here. So the final question comes from an adult child, estranged adult child, actually from the spouse of an estranged adult child, who asked for advice on what to do with unwanted contact and how to stop the calls and random showing up at our house. So this is something that, when I'm working with estranged parent, I have had some who have asked if they could just go by the kid's house. Like they're not answering my phone calls, they're not responding to text messages, they're not responding to emails. I think I should just go and just show up on their doorstep. I highly, 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 highly discourage that. Um, it's if they are not responsive to your outreaches, there is a reason for that. And to show up on their front porch, they're in such a personal way, really can feel like a violation of personal space for them. Okay. Um, for all intents and purposes, it can feel like an invasion of privacy, as if their home was broken into, kind of thing. So I know that sounds extreme for parents to think of it that way, but that is how the kids feel it. And I have to tell you, when I was estranged, if my mother had just shown up on my doorstep unannounced and uninvited, I would have been livid again. Um, so yeah, if you're a parent, I would highly suggest not doing that. For the estranged adult children, if you have parents who are doing this, number one, I believe in firmly laying out the boundaries, expectations in clear language and with compassion and not hate and fear and frustration, right? And being able to say in no uncertain terms. And I believe, in my opinion, it's better to show a united front with both the estranged adult child and their spouse together with the parent, right? So whether that's through an email, through a phone call, or through in person, whatever, however you deem necessary, but to show them and tell them what is acceptable and what is not. So you may email, you may not text me or my spouse, you may not come to our home uninvited, you may not go to either of our places of employment uninvited. If you do, this or these are the this is the consequence or these are the consequences, right? And you be clear about that with them. What are those consequences? And sometimes they have to sometimes can be a little harsh, if you have a parent who is just not taking what you say that is best for your family, and you're saying, we do not want you to come to our home, and they continue to come to your home, you might need to get law enforcement involved. I'm not a fan of that, but I'm also not a fan of a parent just mowing over a kid's desires and wishes and just doing whatever the hell they want to regardless, right? So sometimes it may come to that. Again, I'm not a fan of that. I would rather do it in a million other ways, but sometimes parents just for whatever reason are just refuse to acknowledge, accept it any other way. And if that is the case, then sometimes that's what has to happen. So be clear in your in what the expectations are. Be very clear. You can do this and you cannot do that. If you do that, which is not acceptable, this is the consequence, right? For some adult children, they've said, if you violate my boundaries here and you reach out when I've asked you not to reach out, it starts the clock all over again. If I've asked you for a year of no contact and you reach out, then, you know, 9 months into it, then the clock starts all over again. Whatever the case may be, right? Now, I'm going to slide this in here. It may not apply to the majority of cases, but I also want to just extend this for consideration. If if a parent continues to reach out and you have any desire at all to become curious about how you could potentially reconcile, if you could reconcile, etc., then maybe laying down the ground rules and saying, I'm open to considering this type of communication or this type of contact if we go through some sort of mediation first, right? Maybe that's enough to get the parents' attention to say, look, you need to stop doing this. And a way out of having me to have to call law enforcement is to let's see if we can get with a mediator, right? Either a therapist or a coach, someone, who can help us to navigate this, right? That's another option. It doesn't always have to go to the extreme worst case scenario. There are other options. You just have to figure out what's right for you and your family, right? And I'm always trying to help people to become curious in ways that can help to heal relationships versus furthering the distance. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that would be my advice. Boundaries must have consequences if they're broken, just like any other quote unquote rule in life. And parents, I would ask you and highly encourage you to respect the boundaries that your adult children place. And if you are having a difficult time with that, seek out your own support, right? 99.9% of the time, if you push, and anyone, but especially your children, and try to force them into a corner to do what you want them to do when they don't want to, you are further alienating them. And again, that really goes to any relationship. Think about yourself. If you had a boundary in place and someone continued to violate it over and over and over again, how receptive would you be at trying to work through whatever the issue was within that relationship? Probably not very willing. So, on that note, I will leave it here for today. Again, if you have questions, if hearing this episode has brought up additional questions, feel free to email me, theestrangedheart@gmail.com. And again, that email is in the show notes, so feel free to check there if you weren't able to get it or forget it moving forward. So until next time. This brings this episode to a close. I hope that this time together was time you feel well spent and that you are able to find some takeaway nuggets to help you on your journey, wherever you may be on your estrangement and reconciliation path. If you feel you've received something helpful or positive from this podcast, please consider following us, sharing this podcast with others, leaving a positive review, perhaps entertaining becoming a guest on our show, or following us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok under the same name, The Estranged Heart. As a reminder, there is an online support group on Facebook. If you are a estranged mom who identifies as being spiritual and approaches estrangement with a sense of curiosity rather than blame and judgment, and desire to do inner self-work and reflection, please seek us out. We can be found at facebook.com/estranged mothers support group. And lastly, if you are an estranged parent or an estranged adult child and would like to have your story shared on the podcast, anonymously or not, please reach out to me via email at theestrangedheart@gmail.com.